everybody, and welcome to Olivia's Book Club, the podcast. And I am your host, Olivia Fierro, morning show anchor here in Phoenix, Arizona. But today, not coming from the Arizona's Family Podcast studio, but my own home office. So if you are lulled into relaxation because of the sound of leaf blowers just outside, just go with it. Just go with it, because this is a special occasion. This is a podcast, by the way, if you're just joining us for the first time, for people with a very tall TBR list. Will help you pick what you're going to read next, maybe. Or if you're not really a reader and you pretend to be, we'll help you pretend like you've been catching up on the best books out there. Our special guest today is the fantastic best-selling author so many times over, Sally Hepworth, who is joining us all the way from Australia. Thank God for modern technology. So we are more hours apart than I can count, but it feels like we're all together and connected. She is so gracious to be joining today. So Sally, thank you so much. It is so exciting to see you and talk to you. And oh my gosh, these books, they make me sweat and stress and enjoy, and I can't put them down. So congratulations again on a great one.
Oh, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to chatting about The Good Sister.
So The Good Sister, by the way, was my first time listening to a book entirely audiobook rather than reading, right? So I am very much like the tactile old school. I want to hold on to my books. I had a very long drive on a work assignment, and I listened to the entire thing in one day, The Good Sister. It was unbelievable. And had there been a camera on me in the car, I kept going, and it was awesome. However, I do miss the flipping through and all of my, bookmarked pages and stuff. So let me begin by asking you, as a reader, because I know all writers are avid readers, how do you enjoy digesting books? When and where and what format?
All formats, everywhere. It's funny, I listen to a lot of audiobooks. That's probably my preferred method at the moment, or if not preferred, just the way that I'm managing to consume them at the moment. When I'm in the car like you, when I'm walking, when I'm cleaning, when I'm doing things. So I love audiobooks. I think they are just the most amazing thing that has surged onto the market. But I was just saying to someone that it's quite often that I will have a hard copy, a ebook, and an audiobook going at the same time of the same book. I've heard of people doing that with different books, and they're just listening in different ways. But I just love to consume stories in different mediums, and I think that some people have become sort of snobbish, saying that if you're listening, it's not really a book, or if you're not holding it, it's not really a book. And I say no to that. I think that it's about storytelling and listening to stories, and however you can consume it, then the better. Just do it however it works for you.
So as a storyteller, when did you first realize that you had this creative energy and this spirit and this ability to weave a narrative like this that will have people biting their fingernails and, getting their cuticles a little bit bloody, or, that it is an incredible gift, and it must be so profoundly satisfying, because it's satisfying to read. I can't imagine what it's like to put it down on paper yourself.
Oh, it's a great feeling to know that people are reading it. For the first little while, you feel like, even once you've had a book published, that it's just your mum and your auntie and your husband sitting there really enjoying your book. In terms of when did I know, I mean, hindsight is 2020, isn't it? I now that I have a number of books written, everyone says to me, oh, we always knew that you were going to be a writer. And my mum tells me stories about books that I had written when I was very young. I always knew that it was something I loved to do. I was always writing. I guess I had a bit of a sense that I was good at it, in that way that kids know, when you're bad at something, and I was bad at many, many things, math, sport, art. But I kind of knew that I was good at writing. I wanted to do it, but I didn't know that writing a novel was something that you could do. It always felt like something that, I don't know, old men did in a cabin on a typewriter with a bottle of whiskey, and not something like that you could go to university or college and follow a direct path to do it. And so I didn't follow a direct path. I kind of, which is what I recommend to people. I think you need life experience to be a writer to some extent, and you need to have failed a lot, and you need to have had your heart broken, and you need to have had this kind of life experience in order to be able to step into someone else's shoes and be empathetic. But I guess looking back, it's no great surprise that I became a writer. But at the same time, if you had have asked me before I became a writer, I don't know if that I would have said that this is what I wanted to do. It's just all come together in a very nice way.
Well, you are looking at you, especially the antithesis to like the old guy writer with the pipe and the,
I know.
like, yeah, no. Yes, I could see you working in fashion or in, a lifestyle curator or something like that. So you're obviously like to express yourself in a variety of ways. And I so enjoy looking at your social media and you sharing your outfits and just your vibrancy coming through in so many different ways. So do you just feel like you've got all this creative energy that can come out in all of these forms?
Yeah, well, not in all forms. I always go back to art, and I know you should never say that you're bad at something, but listen, it was not my area of skill. And that's what you think of, isn't it, when you think of creativity? And I see that with my daughter because she is an amazing, gifted artist, but writing isn't her thing. So I do think that there was something about expression of words that was where my creativity went. In terms of fashion, yes, I mean, I love fashion. I love clothes. It's one of those interesting things that I found out on the reverse end, that my novels are shelved in crime or domestic suspense or thrillers, which made me think, wow, maybe I need to change up my look. Because as you say, and if people are listening, I wear a lot of bright colors, red lipstick, and if you think about crime writers, they're always kind of in black, they have glasses, they're very, not as smiley as I am. And so I guess I often think about, obviously I'm not going to change my look, I'm just joking about that, but I often think about the different elements of a person that goes into a book, and the sort of judgments that we make when we think, well, this is a writer, she's written some really sinister stuff, she must be a brooding, dark kind of person. And I know a lot of crime writers, and often they're quite upbeat, chipper people. So it just takes a lot of elements to a person and a lot of different kinds of people to write these books. And yeah, it'll obviously come out in different ways in other parts of our lives, like bright shirts and jewelry and things like that.
Well, I think it's kind of cool too, having the awareness of the way that you dress or present yourself creates a mood or reflects something or how you're feeling on a particular day or your personality or who you are. And that can be part of your character development too. I mean, I'm thinking about Fern and the way that her clothing sort of completely informs us of who she is versus her sister Rose. And you're giving us a very strong visual of these two women who are twins. And it's one of the many ways that you're illustrating how different they are right from the get-go.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. I always like to try and, when I introduce a character to the reader, is just give them a few kind of important details. I'm not a huge descriptive writer, just because I'm not very good at it. I know my limitations, and so I try not to go too far there. But I always think it's very powerful if you can give just in a few deft strokes, this is who we're dealing with. And it might be a little bit of, what they're wearing. It might be a little bit of dialogue, and it might be a little bit of, setting or something. And you can very quickly get an idea of character. And with Fern, there were so many defining things that came to me about her very quickly. I knew the way that her brain worked. Obviously, she is neurodiverse. That's something that I'm very familiar with in my family. And I just knew straight away that she was someone who expressed herself with her clothes. So who knows if I'm leaning a little bit on my own experience a little bit with the clothes, with the neurodiversity, but she just came to me as a 3D walking, talking character, which isn't always how it happens. And so I didn't have to make a lot of decisions about her. That was just who she was. And I just kind of wrote it down, which was a a nice experience for creating a character.
Well, and I think avid readers love to step into a library or a bookstore or have some sort of setting where there are literary references, or you're able to identify with a character that kind of, is more comfortable sitting quietly and reading than dealing with people, because we'd all like to spend our afternoons probably having at least the option on many days. I talk for 4 hours a day in the morning show. So I come home and I'm just like, book, quiet, nobody speak to me. Like, I have nothing left to say. So I think that people really enjoy that. Tell me a little bit about how you begin to craft these very unique narratives, as I'm thinking back and forth between the mother-in-law and the good sister and going between the two voices. But certainly here we're reading Rose's journal entries versus hearing Fern's first person account. So how do you begin to decide which voice you're telling, and do you slide into one more naturally than the other as it goes along?
Yes, a great question. So the second part of that is, yes, I almost always will slide into one more easily than another. And that's not always the case by the end of the novel, but generally I start with a really clear voice, and it's someone's voice. And in this case, it was Fern's, and in the mother-in-law, it was Diana's. So I start with a really clear voice, and generally the other voices come to me as I get to know them as I write the book. In the case of the good sister, I knew that it was going to be told from Fern and Rose's point of view. They're obviously the twin sisters, and I thought it was a really interesting challenge to tell a story from the perspective of twins, because one of the things I love to do is play with perspectives. It's what I did with Diana and Lucy and the mother-in-law. I've done it in every novel, to be able to look at the same situation from the other side, because I think that's how you develop empathy, and that's what I love to explore in my characters. And so to take twin sisters, they've had the same upbringing, they've got the same genetics, you've really taken that nature nurture, everything lines up, and yet they still view, in the case of the good sister, a specific event quite differently from their childhood. I thought that is interesting. Why there's the three sides of the truth, your version, my version, and what actually happened. And so it could have been interesting enough to walk through the perspectives in each sister's own head. Like in Fern's perspective, where in her shoes, in her eyes, we experience things as she experiences them. So to do Rose's perspective in the same way would have been interesting. But I thought what actually added another layer was to actually have her spin on it. This is her telling us that story. This is coloured by her lens, what she wants us to hear, and how she thinks it happened. And so in a way, even though we had just the two perspectives, we had three. And that it was just so interesting to me as someone who loves to see that. So yes, there's planning. I always feel a little bit unwriterly when I say that I plan my books with a spreadsheet.
Okay, nice.
My husband is an accountant and he loves that part of it, but most otherly writerly types say, oh God, it's like I've stabbed them in the heart. But I need to, my brain is very chaotic, and I need to put my thoughts somewhere about the characters. And in this case, in a cell where it's nicely, organized, and I can plot out the scenes that I know need to happen, the ones that jump out a little bit like the characters. There are scenes that jump out and I can see that they're going to come at some point in the book, and I can put it all in a spreadsheet. It very rarely marries up to what ends up on the page. It's not like right, we're up to that scene, I'm going to write that, then we go to the next one. I mean, that would be glorious if that was how it works. But I tend to write a few of them and then I think, nah, that's not going to work. I have to do something else. Or no, I've got to know Rose a bit better and I don't think she'd do that. But it's just a way of me putting a bit of method to the madness, as it were. And Yeah.
It seems like it would make sense to, I think, I just admire writers so much. And I just think sitting down and looking at a blank page or screen has got to be, I would imagine, even for somebody who's been successful and knows that they have a voice and that they're able to craft a story, has got to be so intimidating. So any process to sort of, hone in on at least where to begin would make so much sense. And in particular for you, where you're creating these moments where we're literally gasping and shocked, and all of this tension has to build, and these shifts in perspective dramatically from the reader's perspective. We think we know somebody, we think we understand this story, and then boom, it's all changed. That cannot be accidental. It's got to be.
I mean, it's not for me, but I often listen to other writers talk. I mean, all the writers I know are obsessed with listening to other writers talk about how they do it, because I think we're all plagued by this idea that there is a really good way of doing it and we don't know what it is. And someone out there has the answer, and we need to find out what it is. And yeah, as I said, it's definitely not a perfect method, because, and it's impossible to make a cell in a spreadsheet a whole scene. There's so much more that happens when you write, and often something that seems perfect in a cell, a cell of a spreadsheet I'm talking about, not a jail cell, although sort of the same. Once you pad it out and you add all the colors of the scene and the character, you think, no, that was a stupid idea, that's not going to work. So there is that exploration that happens as you write, whether you're a plotter or not. But this is kind of what's working for me at the moment.
It's amazing to me to hear. I spoke with Kristen Hanna a week or two ago, and she was blowing my mind about a couple of characters that were peripheral, like Elsa in the foreword was a peripheral character in the first draft of the book. I mean, that's exactly what I did. And so
wow.
I was like, how can that be? And so to me, that is remarkable to think about the storyteller also being on a journey. So is there anything in The Good Sister that maybe wasn't there at the beginning that is critically important, that doesn't spoil anything for those listeners who have yet to read it, or something that would be really surprising, like it? How could we have started without, or how did we have that?
Yes, lots of things. Wow, I can't believe that's the case with Kristen Hanna. I'm just still reeling about that. Gosh, I loved Four Winds. Oh my, it was just amazing. So much happens in the book that I had not planned, and I'm trying to think of things that are spoiler free. But even the last line of the book, which is a little bit of a head twist, was not planned. That was something that happened as I wrote. I guess there is a very loving relationship that develops between Fern and Wally in the book that I'm, is not a spoiler to say that they meet each other and come together. And that relationship, I had thought initially would be a friendship, and that was where it would end up. But it very quickly showed me that was not the case. They had chemistry, and so that was one, but many things, and in every book, in The Mother-in-Law, for example, I didn't know who had killed the mother-in-law until it happened. I thought I knew, but I didn't quite know. And as I wrote, a lot more red herrings came up, or as I created red herrings, I thought, could be you, and I like to be surprised with that sort of thing, because if as the writer you're surprised, then the readers are going to be surprised. So it's good to, even if you think not to quite make up your mind until the last minute.
Oh, that is so exciting to hear, and it's so much fun. That's amazing. Talk to me a little bit about you have obviously a very generous spirit, and you mentioned about how writers like to hear what other people's process is, and I know that you share a lot of your craft and your insight. You answered a lot of questions on social media. You also share your outfits, as we mentioned, which is awesome. And you also share your very humorous side of digging into some of your less than stellar reviews. What's wrong with these people? We don't know, but it is hilarious to kind of take control over all of these elements of your public persona. So when did that all start? Is that all pandemic life, or was that happening before? And what do you gain out of it? Because it's very enjoyable for us on this side.
Oh, I'm glad. It probably is pandemic related. I was on social media before that, but in a much less structured way. I would just post things as they came up. And then we went into a very strict lockdown here in Melbourne. We were in the house for about 25 weeks, I think, with only allowed to leave the house for an hour a day for exercise or to go to the supermarket. And it was very, very strict. And at that point, I mean, people say, did you have lots of time? Not really, because I had my 3 children here who were being homeschooled and was writing a book and whatnot. But there wasn't that connection that you get when you see people. Before the pandemic, I was working at the library. I didn't have a job at the library. I used to take my computer there, and that's where I wrote my books. And I've just come back to doing that again. And so I was used to that connection, and I started to do things just for fun. Posting the fact that I had got dressed, I think, was how the clothes started, which was no mean feat. Yeah, look at me. I've put some lipstick on. I'm wearing jeans instead of pajama pants. And then I started to get connections. I started to have people send me pictures back that they had got dressed, and I started talking about writing, which is just so easy for me to talk about because that's what I do every day, and fashion because I get dressed every day. So I don't spend a lot of time on the content. It's literally just me living my life, talking about stuff that I know. But I have got such a gift back from it because I've been able to connect with so many writers. I've had so many amazing brands here in Australia that are female run, lady startup. One woman who started a fashion brand will send me a shirt to wear, and it still blows my mind that I wear something and people buy it. But so I get to have, a lovely new shirt, and then people buy it, and all these connections that I have made, and particularly with women who have read my books and maybe they've got a business and we support each other. It's just that lovely women lifting up other women. This kind of community that I've created, mums who are sharing stories about their kids refusing to eat, anything other than white food, or refusing to put their shoes on, or just those little connections that we have as women. And that was what got me through last year. And I've come out of it with this lovely group of people that, I'm happy to share, all of my things with. I have no secrets. I'm an oversharer from way back, and it's been good for everyone. So I'm grateful for it.
What do you think will have changed, if anything at all, for you, and maybe in amongst writers in general post-pandemic? I mean, it's been such a strange life experience. Does it change the storytelling, or is the storytelling always so far from your own life that it exists in its own space?
Well, there was a lot of discussion among writers, particularly last year when no one knew when we were coming out of it, and there was no vaccine, and all of those things about where our novels would be set. The ones that have just come out, would they be in a lockdown world, or would it be, if a lot of novels going to be set in 2019 before this happened, or are they going to be set in the future? So there was that kind of tangible stuff that writers were thinking about. And also the fact that we were all very happy to be locked in our house and not have to interact with people that much, because there's a bunch of introverts. Everyone kind of liked that. But from a writing sense, I think that there is a level of difference that we will start to see in what people are writing. I just don't think that you can go through something like 2020 and in whatever, I mean, it was different in Australia as it was in the US and the UK. Everyone experienced it differently, but and not have it change your outlook a little bit on life and on the kinds of things that are important. And in some writers, that will look like they'll start writing things that are lighter and happier because that was what they were craving in 2020. In other people, they will start writing things that are deeper because they've started to have more profound thoughts about life. And I think we will see some changes. It certainly has changed me in terms of the things that I want to explore, and the things that are much more important to me now, those family connections, the ability to touch someone and hug them and know that they're there for you after a year that, you really didn't know that. So I'd be guessing there will be some changes.
A lot more stories maybe about divorce or sending your spouse off to like some sort of deserted island after people were just cooped up in the same house for the first time or so. It's like, wow.
Stories of murdered husbands, I think, will be shooting to the top of the charts.
Yeah, it'll just be too many. The market will be saturated with them, just so much. What about your children? I imagine it must be amazing. And I guess kids, they grow up with whatever they grow up with, so they don't understand how unusual your career is, I imagine. But that mom makes up stories that people buy and read and take home and take on airplanes with, and how do they digest that, and how do you filter in, as you're thinking about stories, what they'll eventually be reading?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. My kids think it's normal to write books, because not only do I write them, but a lot of my friends are authors, and so they are completely underwhelmed by anyone who writes a book. And if they go into a bookstore, I say, look, there's mummy's book. They don't care. That's just, and nor should they. That's part of the joy of being a child, isn't it? To think that your mum's a huge embarrassment. So. I'm asked a lot, to the second part of your question, do I ever think of what someone will read when I'm writing my book, in terms of, do I ever feel sheepish about including a sex scene and thinking if my parents will read it? Or do I think about the way I portray a character because in the future my daughters will read it? The answer is no. And I probably should. There's an extraordinary amount of things that I don't think about in advance and then later really regret it. This is how I live my life. However, I guess with the books, all you can do, there's so many things that you're thinking about as you write a book, and you're trying to make it the most true story for these characters and for this plot and for this truth that you're trying to tell through this story. And I think if you start to allow the voices into your head beyond, you've already got the self-doubt and all the other things. If you start thinking, oh, well, my great auntie Gwen won't like this bit because she really doesn't like, smart, if that's what it is, not that I write that kind of thing, but you can start to, you can't listen to those voices, that it's too much. And I've never really had a problem either, although after my first book, The Secrets of Midwives, my dad proofread it for me. He's a real pedant, and I thought, this will be good, he'll find all the spelling errors. And he did, but I remember him handing over the manuscript, which was this big printed bound copy, and saying, if I never read about another perineal tear, it will be too soon. And I thought, okay, yeah,
understood.
So maybe I should think about it a bit more, but
well, that way he was focused, very focused on the coffee, right? He was
indeed. He was not swept away by the story.
Taking the job seriously. So thinking about your twins, the twin sisters in The Good Sister, to me, it's a story of trying to figure out who is the good sister, right? As you begin, you think one is the good sister and one is not. One needs one, the other does not. And things start to kind of evolve and shift as we get more in depth with these two very unique women. When you describe The Good Sister, the novel, and also Rose and Fern, just as people, what do you say?
When I describe The Good Sister, I say it's a book about sisters and about dysfunctionality and secrets and what makes us who we are. And when I talk about Fern and Rose, I say Fern specifically, I could talk about all day. And I say, first of all, she's a single librarian. She is a fantastic librarian. She's a devoted sister, all of the things. And then I say that she's also, I would imagine, on the autism spectrum, and she has sensory processing disorder. And those things always come second in my mind, because that is really the least interesting thing about Fern. Yes, she is probably autistic, but she is also all these other wonderful things. And one of the things that was really important to me with this book, because as I said earlier, I have a neurodiverse family. My son is autistic, my daughter has ADHD, my husband is on the spectrum. The wider family also, we have autistic family members, and we have seen some great things done in fiction where we are seeing more autistic characters, which is great. And even autistic characters who are in the lead role of a book, which I love to see. But one thing that I really wanted to see in this book is that there was a neurodiverse character, not because they were neurodiverse, not in a story about autism, but that Fern just was a kick-ass lead character, a great librarian, a book about sisters, and she happened to be autistic. You know, people exist in the world with all different kinds of brains and all different kinds of skills and all different kinds of abilities, and so they should exist in books and not just in a book that tells the story of autism or her neurodiversity. So I always mention that when I'm talking about Fern, that's an important part of her, but it's not the most important part of her. Then we have Rose, who is her sister, who is, I'm not giving any spoilers away here. She is what we would think of as the responsible sister. She is married, she has a great job, she looks after Fern and has ever since they were children and escaped this very difficult childhood. And now they are adults and they're navigating their way. And the book is really about what happens when Fern discovers that Rose can't have the baby that she yearns for. And Fern decides to take it upon herself to try and have a baby for her sister without telling her that that's the plan. And that
details.
Exactly.
The heart is in the right place. That's for sure.
Exactly.
Well, and that as a plot point jumping off, I mean, you begin, of course, feeling a ton of compassion for Rose, because this is something that's very, identifiable, that I've been through, a lot of women have been through, and that desire to have a child and finding that obstacle of having the difficulty it can make you totally psychotic. I mean, it could turn you into a completely different person, because it is very hard to focus on anything but when that's something that you're efforting and running into obstacle after obstacle. But it also separately, I thought just the way that these women are remembering not just particular important plot point moments of their childhood, but just in general about the way they remember childhood and dynamics with their mother in regular families where nothing as interesting is happening, hopefully, as it is in the Good Sister. But we all have a completely different memory of our families. I mean, it's like you talk to siblings in one family and we all have had an opposite experience sometimes. It's wild. And that's, I think that was an interesting thing to be playing on, because it's very identifiable.
Exactly. Well, my brother, I have two older brothers that are twins, and my brother once famously said around the dinner table, as when we were all adults and we were talking about our childhood, and just to be clear, my mum is nothing like Fern and Rose's mum. She's the sweetest, loveliest, gentlest, kindest mother in the world. And we were talking about childhood, and my brother said, "You know what I remember about childhood?" And we kind of looked at him and he said, "Being cold and hungry." And Mum was so horrified. And as we dug a little bit deeper, those memories were associated with him being at school, and they had to wear shorts and he was cold. And but it just is so funny, the different things that stick out to us as important. And I was thinking of all these lovely Christmases that Mum had given us, and I was talking about what a idyllic childhood we had, and there was same family, cold and hungry.
Right. It's a glass half full versus half empty type of thing, right? It depends on how you're really looking at it.
Exactly.
Given that you do this Writerly Wednesdays, and you give the advice to those people who just love stories and think, okay, maybe I have one inside me, maybe I want to put something down. What is the simplest way to begin to kind of tap into that creativity and get over, I guess, your own self-consciousness before writing?
Yeah, such a great question. And the answer, which is sad because I like to give a very simple, direct answer, and say, just do this. My gut wants to say, just write, don't get bogged down in the, learning how to do it perfectly, because I know that can be something that stops people. They end up reading 100 books about how to write a novel instead of actually just writing the novel. So my first instinct is to say, just write, just do it. But I know that is not the way that works for everyone. And the more questions I answer for Writerly Wednesday, and the more writers that I meet who do it differently from me, the more I realize that everything, like everything in life, it's all grey, isn't it? You have to take into account who you're talking to, what their fears are about writing a novel. Some people are just so blocked by the fact that they're terrified of putting themselves out there, and they get caught in this perfectionism. I think if people are ready and they're just, I want to do this and I want to write a novel and this is the goal, and they're motivated, then yeah, just write it. Absolutely. But if you're going to be blocked by something, maybe do the work on that first and then get down and get writing. Because it is a tragedy when, I've written 7, 8 novels in the last 8 years. And then I see people who've been working on the same novel the whole time and no one's read it, they haven't been able to get it out there because they're so trapped in it for whatever reason.
So it's go to the therapist first before you go to the writing workshop. That's pretty much what it is.
Do the therapy. If you're emotionally ready, then just write that book.
Okay. Step 1 and then step 2. I've got it. I know that The Mother-in-Law was purchased to be made into a television series. Is that still happening? And if it is, what level of involvement would you want or anticipate?
Yes, it is still happening. It was slowed down by COVID, like everything has been. But it's ticking along. I get little updates every few months of new people that have been attached or new scripts that we've got and things. So it's a really exciting process to be a part of. And what involvement? Technically, I am an executive producer, which sounds incredibly exciting, and I am very, very happy about that. In terms of what that means for me is that I'm involved, I'm kept updated. Ultimately, I am really happy to allow the experts to run with it. I don't want to, I have no desire to write a script. I feel like script writing and novel writing is so different because of the fact that you don't get that internal monologue, which is my real love child. So I don't have a desire to write it, which is good because I'm not writing it. And I am really excited to see this project come to fruition if that ends up happening. And I really feel like it's in the best hands with the people who have the connections and who know how to do it. So in general, I think that if I said, no, I don't like that, no, terrible idea, then they would listen. But so far, I've just been sitting back with awe and really enjoying the process of getting to see it happen. So yeah, it's been really fun.
That will be a new experience for you to see your characters on screen, right?
Yes, I think most writers would say that it's a dream to see that happen, on the big screen or the small screen. For me, it's not the biggest. The biggest dream is mostly about the books, because I love, novels, reading them, writing them, seeing people read my words is the biggest goal. But gosh, there's something cool about seeing, a Hollywood star playing Diana or Lucy. I mean, that would just be amazing, wouldn't it? I'd love to see that.
Well, and then it's sometimes that's what draws people who are not into books all the time. They see something, hear something, and then it just, okay, now, maybe I'm going to make myself read something before this show is out or this movie is out, so that I don't spoil it for myself either way. I am curious, what was the first book you remember falling in love with? I'm always very curious to hear from writers when they first became a reader, what it was, who it was, which one hooked them, because it's like everything changes, the whole world opens up, right?
Yeah. Well, I've always been a reader since I was a child. My mum was a teacher, and so she was always bringing books home from the school library where she worked. The first book I remember reading as a child that really I got that beautiful feeling of being transported was Enid Blyton, the naughtiest girl in the school. And I remember finishing it. I read it in about a day, and I finished it and I said, Mum, I really love this book. And it was in the morning I finished it, and I gave it to her. And when I got home from school that night, the next one, because there was 3 of them, the next one was sitting there for me. And I always say that to people who have children, who want their children to read. Put the book in their hands, just keep giving your children those books. And the same thing happened when I finished the second book. The third book showed up, and that was, away we went. But as a young adult, there were books, all of those coming of age books. There was a book called Tully by Paulina Simons that was really about, now I look back, a very troubled young girl, but she was going through something. And when you read books about people your own age going through something, I think as a young woman or a young man, I think handing a book like that to my daughter when she's 17 or 18 or 16 will be, so I hope, the gift that it was to me. There was another book, an Australian novel called Looking for Alibrandi, which was again about a young woman who was searching for her birth mother, and she just was very lost in the world and didn't know who she was. And all the books that have been really important to me have followed the trajectory of my life and where I was at that time. And even when I was a young single person, there were books like Bridget Jones's Diary that I thought, oh yes. And now it's the books about mothers who are trying desperately to hold their lives together, and yes, thinking about murdering their husbands sometimes, or their mother-in-law, or whatever it is. And who knows what's going to come next. But yeah, they're the tend to be the books that I want to be reading, and they're the books that I want to be writing as well.
Well, it's that magic that happens when a great book comes to you, but at the right time, and it gives you this sort of lens to look at whatever's going on around you in your own life, or yourself, even more importantly. And it's like, okay, this hit home. This is hitting, resonating on more than one level of just that I enjoy this story, or this is captivating writing.
Yes. And sometimes it's even books that are in a completely different world, but they are essentially someone going through a similar thing. Like I remember Memoirs of a Geisha was a book that transported me, and obviously my life looks nothing like, that I can't even remember the name of the person, but you get to see and be so inspired by the hardship that people live through as a young girl, and then the way that she was able to make her own life through that. And I know that book is kind of problematic now, but you can be inspired by, and I love to be inspired by, people in all different life paths and journeys who are just trying to do the same thing that we all are doing.
You have been writing and publishing in a very rapid succession. I imagine you're probably, everything is outlined for you in terms of a calendar and contracts of when you need to be creative, especially, and how much time you have to tap into that creativity. When will we expect another bestseller from you? And I think we say instant bestseller now with The Good Sister, right? It's like pre-sale bestseller even. So how much time do you have to get your next story out, and how far into that process are you now?
Well, luckily the next book has been written, and I had delivered it before The Good Sister came out. And people always seem very impressed when I say that, and like I'm very organized, which I love because I'm a very disorganized person. But in fact, publishing is slow. So it takes a year by the time you deliver a book for that book to then come out. By the time they place it in they book a date for it to come out, and all the marketing and all of those things, finding a cover. And so by delivering it a year in advance, that's really right on time. But where that leaves me now is I'm currently developing a new book that will be for 2 years' time. I have an idea. I've got my spreadsheet out. I was plodding away at the library yesterday and making notes, and in that kind of fearful time where I think, oh, is this a book? Is this going to work? And then I have a moment where I think, oh yes, this could work really well. And that is a process that self-doubt and enthusiasm will continue the whole way through the writing of this book. So that's how I know that I'm on track, where I'm I'm definitely not sure it's going to work, but also really excited about it. That's a good
That's a good space.
And so I'll write it, I guess, between now and the end of the year. Then hopefully we'll have a draft for my publishers to have a read of, a bit more editing, and then deliver it, I guess, this time next year or a little bit earlier. And that's enough time for me. I mean, people say, you're churning out the books, and I think I'm not churning. Like that word, churning. Yeah, just I feel like I know how long it takes me, and it usually takes me exactly the same, 6 to 9 months to write that book. It's my full-time job, and I just go deep into the whole. And I think if I had too much more time, I might start to, overcook it a little bit. So I don't feel stressed. I feel like I'm in a nice harmony of bringing out a new book, all that excitement, and then dive into a new project. And I love it. I feel so grateful to be able to do this job, and this is what I've been working for. And it's fun. It's what I've always wanted to do.
Oh, it's an amazing career, and to know the pleasure that you're giving people all over the world. I mean, I was just laughing at myself listening to this, driving alone, and it was to Yuma, Arizona, just desert and just long, would have just been the most unpleasant to drive, and it would have felt like 20 hours. And it was just, I was like, okay, I can drive much longer today. Much longer today. This is just so great. So it's incredible.
Thank you.
It's incredible what you do. A very last thing, since we're so far away from you, I noticed on your Instagram that you did say that you don't actually like Vegemite, which is one of those things that we all assume that you really do. What else can you tell us about life in Australia that maybe is counter to what we see in film and television, or that we might find charming or surprising?
That's a great question. Vegemite is very commonplace, even though I don't like it. I'm definitely the exception to the rule. And look, one story that I told, back in the time when I could travel, and I was in Rhode Island, I was asked at an event for kangaroo stories. I had to think about that because kangaroos are in the country and I live in the city, but I actually did have a story about when I was at a country kind of wine and music festival, and I was walking through the car park and I was hit by a kangaroo, like one is hit by a car. A kangaroo came bouncing out of between the cars, and they're big, right? And it's kind of like being hit by a fridge or something. And I was walking along, and then the kangaroo came, bounced into me. I skidded across the road, fell down, and then it bounced off again. And I've got the people in Rhode Island love that story, and that's a very unusual thing to happen. But I keep that one up my sleeve for when I'm talking to Americans. They love that story about my kangaroo incident.
Oh, man.
But in general, and I have lived in London, I've lived in Canada. I haven't lived in the States, but I have visited a few times. I think that I'm always blown away by how similar life is in the different places that I have lived. There are different accents, there's some different foods and different smells, and but in general, human beings are friendly and nice and warm and kind and all of the good things. And it's just, I think that you would find that here in Australia too. There are also bad things that happen, but I've been blown away by the generosity of spirit in all the countries that I have lived, and I think that Australia is true of that too.
Well, certainly you are a phenomenal ambassador, except for now when I finally get there, I'm going to be looking like this anytime you go into a parking lot. I hear you can get hit by a kangaroo. I know this for sure. It has happened.
It's happened.
Sally Hepworth told me herself. It's a fact. Sally, thank you so very much for talking with me. I appreciate it so much. I'm a huge fan, and The Good Sister is phenomenal. The mother-in-law is phenomenal, and on and on. So if anybody who is seeing this, listening to this, has not yet picked up The Good Sister, what is wrong with you? Go buy it. Buy 2 copies. Give one to a friend. Maybe you have a sister. Who knows? You might want to have one to mark up and one to leave a pristine copy. So thank you very much. And what a pleasure to speak to you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I loved it.
Number one, I want Sally Hepworth to be my best friend.
Yes.
And the only thing that is negative about her is that she is geographically undesirable, being that she lives in Australia. But I think I can work around it.
Think about that closet.
Oh my gosh.
She has some really good wardrobe choices.
She is so much fun.
Yes.
So, and not only that, but boy, she knows how to write a psychological thriller, in my opinion. Even though she says it falls into a lot of different categories, I guess, her work. So let's take a look ahead to the kind of summer books that come out that have you biting your nails and turning the pages quickly that we can't wait to read.
Yes. So we've got some newcomers, not necessarily newcomers, but new and upcoming authors. We also have thriller authors who have written many books that have new releases this summer. So the first we're going to talk about is The Maidens. That's actually by the author who wrote The Silent Patient.
That was huge.
I loved that book. And for a thriller reader, that one actually spun my head around, and I couldn't believe the ending. It was a total gasp. So seeing this one, The Maidens, coming out, releases the middle of June, June 15th. I am really excited for it, except the people who have been reading it with their ARCs, their advanced reader copies, are rating it a little bit lower than I would anticipate with this author. So I'm very intrigued. I mean, I always feel like if I can spot it, the ending far enough away, it doesn't get high ratings for me. I didn't poke into the reviews because I like to do it myself, You
don't want to find a spoiler. It could just be that the other one was so good that your expectations are too high, too loaded.
Absolutely the case. And with The Silent Patient, I mean, that one was, I recommend it to everybody because it is such a mind-bending ending, and I really loved that.
Right.
So looking forward to that. We'll see how it goes. Riley Sager, which is a pen name, but I've read about 5 of his books. 5? I think every book he's written in this category I have read. Survive the Night, it's kind of funny because it has a very, like, When Harry Met Sally thing. They're on a ride together in the car. They don't really know each other. They met through, like, a campus bulletin board of taking a trip back home to Ohio together.
Oh, okay.
So I was like, oh, okay, a little bit of a romantic comedy trope, but there's a killer on campus. A little scream. Little scream for you. So the lady in the story, is increasingly convinced that maybe the guy she's riding with may be the campus serial killer.
I want to read this.
And the whole idea is she's got to survive the night because they're taking stops along a highway. They're going back to Ohio from their campus. So we'll see how that goes. That one, it's funny because I thought Riley Sager has had some really good twists. The last one, Lock Every Door, could see it a little bit ahead. So we'll see how this one goes. It's got middle tier ratings right now on Goodreads. We'll see how it goes.
And it seems like that author is more of kind of a genre bender, right? Like a little horror. Some would call it thriller. Some would call it horror. What goes in between? If there's an element of supernatural in some.
The Final Girls was more horror than thriller for me. Home After Dark was more thriller. So we'll see how this one goes.
Survive the Night, the title is sticking me right now.
This sounds more Final Girls status to me than it does any of his others. And then we each got a copy from Gallery Books, which is from Simon & Schuster, The Perfect Family by Robyn Harding. This actually has amazing reviews right now, up into past 4, which is incredible for any book. This is kind of like everyone thinks it's the perfect family, and then they're starting to get assaulted. Like first it starts with like eggs being thrown at their house, and then the attacks get more violent, more personal. And so this family's trying to figure out who's attacking them and these violent assaults. And so, but they all have secrets from the outside world. but they have secrets from each other as well.
Oh, yes.
So
it's calling our names.
yes, that
from
one
the
comes
TBR.
out. That one comes out in August. So we've got some time
I
until
love
it's like
the idea
officially
of
out.
reading ahead of people.
Well, that's
It's too exciting.
It's a fun thing about ARCs. It's like, oh, I just read this amazing book. You've got to get it. Oh, wait, it doesn't come out for like 6 months. I'm so sorry.
It's a good motivator for me.
Right. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get to talk to that author.
Yes, I would love to.
So,
Ooh, that's a lot.
Yes.
I want to mention one that I also have in my TBR that I have an arc of, and it is going to be devoured quite soon. This is Falling by T.J. Newman, and she lives in Arizona, which is where
Oh,
we're
wow.
based. And this is her first book deal, and it was written up in a bunch of the trades because it's a gigantic multi-million-dollar book deal. This is the first time she's written a book. She's a flight attendant, and she writes a thriller set on a plane.
Can't do it.
Yes. And so apparently it's unbelievable, and I am absolutely going to read it and hoping that she'll be a guest on the podcast because it's really just a fantastic story of how she came up with the concept, too, of how vulnerable people are while they're on an international flight.
Yeah.
And she's looking at the passengers and kind of came up with the story while she was on the job. So I think that's going to be a big hit this summer.
It's funny because I can see that you've got a little page in front of you that shows the cover, and there is an airplane on it. And I've made the mistake of accidentally reading a book that is about an airline disaster.
On a plane.
While on a plane, I had
Rookie.
to. I didn't know that was part of it wasn't in the description of the book. And I just closed the book and I put it back in my backpack. And it's like,
No, thank you.
I got to get on solid land before I pick this one back up.
Yes.
So that's exciting.
And also, we both love Lisa Jewell, and she's got another one coming out that's called The
Yes.
Night She Disappeared. And the premise is a college girl and her boyfriend go to some big estate party out in London or in the countryside somewhere and are never seen again. And it involves an author and all of this. So I mean, she knows how to do it. So that's coming out late in the summer, and we're planning to talk to her on the podcast as well.
It might be cold in here, but I got actual chills hearing that. She is so great.
I know.
And we read one of her books.
We did. Then she was gone.
And she was gone in book club. And, I like the dark,
I do too.
but not everybody likes the dark. But I think that
I'm into it.
she's such a great writer for the dark
Completely.
side. And and it's absolutely relatable in those kind of dark ways.
Oh yeah, and it's I love an author who can deliver what you're expecting.
Yes.
You have a feel for this, a taste for it, and so hopefully we'll have a lot of thrilling moments going through some great thrillers over the summer. This was a fabulous moment with Margaret. Margaret, thank you very much. I better let you get back to your books.
Probably.
Thanks for listening to Olivia's Book Club, the podcast. I'm your host, Olivia Fierro. Our producer is Margaret Stewart. Our editor is Nick Sanchez. You can send us an email with your thoughts or your book recommendations. Olivia's Book Club at azfamily.com is the address. And you can check out Olivia's Book Club on Facebook or find us on Instagram. Hello, Bookstagrammers, at olivias.bookclub. And Margaret is at Overbooked and Overdue. Make sure to rate and subscribe to this podcast and tell your friends. You can find us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Amazon Music.